Vance, in an interview last week, said he hates big tech and says he likes Lina Khan. So it'll be interesting to see how all that stuff plays out. Welcome to Telltales. I'm Mike Nicoletti. Every week, along with my co-hosts Jason Wallace and Hunt Lawrence, we bring you the cash flow memo. Get it at telltales.us. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive deep into energy, technology, and healthcare. So download the memo now and get started.
The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
Okay, we promised not to talk politics until the election was over. And I guess the election was over sometime around 2 or 3 this morning when Associated Press called Trump with more than 270 electoral votes. Exhibit C, Trump will make a difference here because the 4.4 million barrels of surplus capacity for 24 includes Iran producing 3. Iran announced for 25 they plan to produce 3.5, with 2 million for export. At the end of the Trump administration, Iran's barrels for export were practically nothing. Most export barrels go to China. So I think what we can expect sometime after inauguration is a deal with China. And part of the deal will be not to take Iranian barrels. And that'll tighten up that surplus in oil. There's been lots of publicity on oil demand, but even the IEA, which has been, is predicting, like peak oil just a few years away, peak oil demand, does have an increase in 25 versus 24. So if the Iranian barrels, they won't disappear right away, but if they start to phase down, that'll help tighten up the market in 25, which will be good. On Exhibit B, I would say the impact of Trump is better demand. If we look at the production demand statistics, power demand has been up pretty steadily. 23 versus 22 was up 2.5 Bs, which is remarkable because everyone says the future for demand in gas is LNG. Well, power's been doing better in LNG. For example, power will be up 1.5 this year. LNG is flat. One of the problems longer term is the Biden administration, or the Biden-Harris administration, was putting a hold on new LNG projects. I think that hold will be lifted in a Trump administration. So out 26, 27, 28, there'll be more LNG exports. The other thing the Biden administration was doing, the most efficient way to make power out of natural gas is with combined cycle. What that means is you have a gas turbine, which is like a big jet engine, but the exhaust that comes out of the turbine is run over pipes with water in them that flashes into steam. So your heat rate is around 10 with the simple gas turbine, but it goes all the way down to 6.5 or so with combined cycle. Those combined cycle units would be very important to put next to data centers. Really much better, much less risky than trying to bring nuclear plants back. And the Biden administration had been discouraging those combined cycle plants and insisting that if any were put up for permitting, they have carbon sequester. In other words, you pull the CO2 out of the emissions, and that rule will go by the board. So I think natural gas demand will be stronger. The key, as we talk about every Wednesday, is natural gas supply. And the problem, if you look at the table on the top, is the Permian. The Haynesville at these gas prices will flatline. Marcellus has flatlined for years, but the Permian keeps growing. That's as a byproduct of oil production there. So you're just gonna have some more supply from the Permian. So it's key to have 1.5 B or 2 Bs of demand increase. I think with Trump being elected, that will help. Exhibit A, where we come down to that statistics on the deficit over all other in expenses. In other words, not including interest, not including defense, not including Social Security and whatnot, was $910 billion in 2019. It got up close to $3 trillion in the COVID years. We got down to $1.9 trillion in 23, 1.3 trillion in 23, and it should have kept going down to maybe, you're probably not going to get back to 910 billion, but you might have been able to get it back to 1.2. Instead, it's 1.44 this year. That's just unacceptable. And I think that Elon Musk factor, he's going to be active to reduce spending. And you really can't do too much about the lines up above. Those are pretty well set. You can't do too much about the interest, and I'm not sure there's too much you can do about the defense, but you can go after that all other. It'll be very disappointing if Elon Musk gets interested in something else and doesn't follow through on trying to figure out how to save 200 or 300 billion. Now, will 200 or 300 billion solve a deficit of $1.9 trillion? No, it doesn't. But at least you get the trend going down. So what you hope for then is a GNP that goes up by 4 or 5% a year, which is like 2.5% real growth and maybe 2.5% inflation. So your debt as a percentage of GNP starts to come down. And that would be terrific if that happened. Mike, Jason, anything else on macro results from the election?
I would add, I think on Elon Musk and the general plan to reduce, he stated that he wants to take $2 trillion out of the budget. There was a candidate that is also part of this transition team who had a relatively coherent plan for how to get there. His plan, this is Vivek Ramaswamy, who's also on this transition team. His plan that he laid out in his presidential candidacy was to reduce the federal workforce by 75%, close down a handful of agencies, or fold in their responsibilities under a singular agency rather than have multiple agencies responsible for the same thing, relocate agencies outside of Washington, D.C. So I think it'll be interesting to see how close the actual implementation aligns to what he had planned out. Elon obviously brings a lot to the table in actually getting things done, but it is Vivek's plan that was on the table to do a lot of this stuff. On the energy front, one of the ones he said he wanted to remove was the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and so I think that's an interesting view, considering all the interest in nuclear. But it sort of maybe changes if we're open to using gas again.
Yeah, I'm suspicious of nuclear for power because it's so capital intensive. It's not clear that small nuclear reactors are going to be any less capital intensive per megawatt. So I'm a big fan of gas. If you have a changed stance here, the Biden-Harris stance was don't encourage, don't permit, or try to stop or slow down projects that have 10, 15, 20-year lives that are based on fossil fuels. I think that will just change over, and combined cycle power plants, a 20-year asset, and LNG a train is a 20-year asset, and that these things go forward is very, very, very important. To have just a more rational energy policy in our economy. With that, I'd like to turn to page 15, and to make sure we spend enough time on healthcare, do healthcare first. So, Jason, page 15 is Pfizer, Moderna, Lantheus, BioNTech, and Vertex. I know you have Vertex news, but do you want to go through news on the others first?
I can give you the good news or the bad news first. Well, just on a Trump presidency, a couple of things. I think he signaled that they're going to look at potentially making changes to the ACA, but I kind of see that as lower probability at this point. We've had Republican-controlled Congress in the past that failed to reform the ACA. The one plan I have heard that J.D. Vance floated was separating higher burden people, higher healthcare burden people into a high risk pool, and that has associated higher premiums. Maybe that goes somewhere, but at the same time, that's going to hurt a lot of their constituents. So I kind of see that not going through as well. Another thing is the FDA may lose their F. So the food part of the FDA, for the large part, we allow a lot of ingredients in our food supply that the rest of the world outlaws. So Mike and I were talking about it, and if they're not going to regulate it, why are we spending the cost on a regulatory agency like that? So that's an extreme take, but I don't think it'll get cut away. But maybe we take a closer look at what ingredients we do allow in our food supply versus, what's happening in Europe and the rest of the world. As far as the companies specific on this page, Pfizer had kind of a surprise success in COVID vaccine sales. I don't think they were expecting that. Pfizer and Moderna both saw that, so kind of a windfall for them, a little extra cash to promote their drug discovery pipelines. On the companies that we own, the good news first is in Vertex. The earnings were pretty fantastic. The cystic fibrosis franchise keeps growing. The main reason for growth is they're allowing the people on treatment to live longer, and therefore there's more people requiring treatments. So the next generation of their CF drug has been submitted to the FDA, and that's due for a decision by this January. So the interesting thing about that version of the drug is that formulation gets rid of a royalty payment that was due to Royalty Pharma. So in the past, Vertex has sold a portion of sales to that company in order to finance future development. This new formulation discontinues use of that specific compound in their combination drug. Then result is they'll have higher margins on their sales. So even today at the price that Vertex is at, we kind of see that you're essentially still getting their drug discovery pipeline for free, which is huge. There's a lot in it. And, we've talked about the non-opioid pain treatment, and that's big, but there's not really a lot of new news there. The big thing that came out in their latest earnings call was around their type 1 diabetes cure. So we never included that in our modeling because it was early stage, which comes with a high risk of failure and on a much longer time horizon, typically. What they said, though, is they've been holding discussions with the FDA and the EMA around the results of their phase 1/2 study, which, again, was only 12 patients who received this engineered stem cell treatment transplant. The results were so positive. 11 of the 12 were functionally cured of type 1 diabetes that they agreed to change the study format into a 1-2-3, which I had never seen done. So essentially they're rolling into a phase 3 study, and in the end, it's only going to have 50 patients, which is very small for a phase 3 study. But it brings the time horizon on this pipeline, on this therapeutic, down to the study being potentially completed in a little over a year. So we viewed this as something that was much further out, but this could be something that's much closer time frame. And the value of a T1D cure is going to be huge. We haven't even, and Mike's thought a little bit about it, but we don't really have numbers for it really.
Well, we did some handicapping, and it could be very big.
Very big, yeah. So this version requires immunosuppressants for the transplanted cells to not be rejected by the body. So it's not an easy cure, but the next versions, they have 2 other versions in the works, and the next versions will reduce or eliminate the need for those immunosuppressants. So that's the good news. The bad news was with Lantheus. The earnings were a bit of a disappointment. So they came out this morning. We've been digging through it, trying to formulate our opinion on it. But the big thing is sales of Pylarify did not grow this quarter due to pricing pressures. So what they say they're doing is locking in longer term partnerships with providers, but at the cost of giving them price concessions. So you expect them to be doing this in preparation for an expansion of Pluvicto. So the Pluvicto is Novartis's prostate cancer treatment. So you need one of these radiodiagnostics like Pylarify to image the tumors before you get the Pluvicto treatment. So an expanded use there will expand the market, potentially double the market size for the radiodiagnostics. So that seems like a logical long-term plan for Lantheus. But today, their sales growth wasn't there. We think it's kind of due to them saturating the narrow approval that they're the market that they're in now, and now there's price competition since the market's been taken by the two players. Their guide going forward was light and not expecting much growth, and again, that's probably because they've saturated that market. So they can't really guide to an FDA's decision that's coming next year, but they have a decision point on two expanded uses for these radioligand therapies. And if they approve either one, it greatly expands the market for Pylarify. So that's kind of the binary outcome that's ahead.
As I recall, Jason, the one of the uses is for people with Alzheimer's.
Yeah, they have a separate diagnostic that images two diagnostics. One that images the tau protein tangles and then the amyloid plaque in the brain. Those diagnostics are being used by a lot of the studies, the research study, university research studies, as well as Leqembi studies. So it's being used. It's not approved yet. They expect to submit approval next year. And they see that as a really big market. So that could get interesting next year.
Just one question, which you may not have an answer for, because as you said, the Vertex, what I recall, the original trial was 12 people, and they were in the UK. And I thought to myself, oh, that sounds interesting 3 or 4 years from now. But now it's gotten accelerated. How many people in the U.S. or what percentage of a population in a place like the U.S. has type 1 diabetes? Is it 5% or more? Or do you have any sense for what percentage of our population?
I don't, and I should know that number.
I have
Mike is typing furiously.
Yeah. I have some market size. So there's currently 1.5 million people in the U.S. that have type 1 diabetes, and 64,000 new patients are diagnosed with type 1 every year. And and then just to handicap the figure, as the direct costs associated with the diabetes, particularly just the type 1 diabetes portion of managing a patient, is $11,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So you can see how the numbers get very large very quickly, and that doesn't include all the associated issues that that one has that surrounds the cost to manage those patients. So,
that cost is insulin and monitoring and
right. Yeah. So this is a really big opportunity to carve some costs out of the. I mean, obviously they're going to charge a hefty sum of money for this treatment, but the upside potential long run for the health system is very high.
Yeah. Any commentary on Lilly and the Wegovy and the weight loss drugs?
One interesting thing was obesity rates in the U.S. actually declined for the first time in I don't know how long for this past year.
Okay, let's take a quick break for a message from Oak Cliff Sailing.
Dawn Riley with Oak Cliff here again, and we've had a lot of October surprises. First of all, we're getting all the boats out of the water, the Match 40s. Almost all the rigs are down, a couple of boats are out, and we have a great team of volunteers here and staff members checking all of the sail to make sure that they're ready to go in the springtime. We're already thinking about that. We have a new team member, Harry, who is joining us on the shore side. And then we also have our high-performance high school sailor, who's down sailing on a NACRA 15 that was donated by Hannah Sweat. So we're going to go down to the beach and see how he's doing. And over the weekend, we had an amazing, amazing weekend of racing in the Halloween Invitational. Peter Wickwire and the Canadians filled out the podium. And now we got to figure out how to get more match races in here. We have a World Match Racing Tour Academy next summer, and that will all be posted on our website shortly. Our brochures are going out, and I'm going to leave you with a really cool video of some amazing racing and 30 knots of wind. Probably the biggest surprise was no damage. Love that. We're going to have an excellent end of the month of October with Halloween tomorrow, 75 to 80 degrees. And I will see you next Wednesday.
And now back to the show.
Can we switch to page 3? I have a anecdote that's secondhand, but it's certainly entertaining. We could all switch to page 3. Mm-hmm. This was an anecdote, someone commenting on Trump winning all 7 swing states and maybe the popular vote, although I guess there's still a lot of votes coming in from California, so maybe he won't wind up winning the popular vote. But here's the commentary from someone. Said, Trump probably is not as committed to protecting Taiwan, but the incentive for China in Taiwan is basically Taiwan Semiconductor. But if they were able, through some kind of a negotiated settlement or whatnot, to in effect be the host country for Taiwan Semiconductor, it wouldn't necessarily help them too much, because ASML can hit a few buttons and all the equipment goes down. Do you think that's an exaggeration?
I don't think it's an exaggeration that it's technically feasible, probably. But I'll give you my read on the Trump-Taiwan situation. If you remember, during his first term, he's the one that set up this Taiwan Semiconductor Arizona fab that is now cranking out 4-nanometer chips at better yields than they're producing in Arizona. So that, or in Taiwan. So that's seen as a huge win, a positive thing. Trump has said that he dislikes the position we are in with Taiwan because we're essentially over a barrel in that we have to defend them. And I think his solution that he's painted for this is that if we were to add tariffs to imports from Taiwan, it would incentivize Taiwan Semiconductor to build more fabs in the U.S. So I think he's got some plans for solutions to this. I think that, this ties into the CHIPS Act, right? A lot of that money, Trump's been pretty dour on it, but I think we've seen the billions of dollars going into Intel and not a lot of results coming out of the other end. So, that I think this administration's stance is going to be, we're going to try to solve this with tariffs rather than stimulus. So, what's that mean long term? I think we're still dependent on Taiwan Semiconductor, and it's going to take more than 4 years to get us independent of it. So we'll see.
Yeah, the fab yields from Arizona, though, are great news. It proves you can potentially economically make the chips in the U.S. rather than Taiwan. Taiwan's got huge costs associated with electricity and water there, although Arizona's got water issues. But the yield's higher, so potentially that makes up for the costs of using U.S. labor.
Right, more automation too should help. So,
right.
And to the original point with ASML, ASML actually has a pretty big services business where their people are stationed with a lot of the devices, kind of managing the upkeep and keeping them running. So yeah, if they were pulled out, they could essentially turn those machines off. That's not to say that, Chinese engineers won't figure out how to turn them on again.
Yeah, we already know they're reverse engineering basically every piece of semiconductor equipment that gets sent over there. So
Yeah.
One of the commitments we made was not to talk politics and not to beat up on Intel anymore. The election passing, what do you think about Intel being merged into Qualcomm or Broadcom under the theory that it's a train wreck, and rather than having to write off investments that have been made under the CHIPS Act or invest more money under the CHIPS Act, why not just turn over management of Intel to someone else, and maybe Broadcom rather than Qualcomm, given their experience of consolidating businesses?
Yeah, I think that, the distinction among this administration and the transition team is that they're all very pro-American exceptionalism. So if they could make a case that this would make our capabilities better by putting Intel with something else, then I think that definitely happens. Do you agree, Jason? Or
I would love to see the fab operate on its own and try to provide competition to TSMC. So they were the first company that acquired ASML's latest generation of lithography machines. So they're working on essentially skipping a couple processes and in the effort to catch up to the leading edge node. And we've talked, in the past that no company's ever fallen off the leading edge on semiconductor production and caught them back up. But I'd love to see them try, at least have the capital to give it a go versus it getting sucked into, a Broadcom and just kind of churning along,
Well, I agree with that. I don't think there's any chance that Broadcom or Qualcomm has any interest in owning and operating a fab.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it?
Yep. Nobody wants to own it. And the only way that you can make it make sense is if they have customers, and they currently don't have customers.
No, they have one customer. Don't they have Amazon?
Well, yeah, but it's a low volume chip. It's basically a super flighty commitment. I mean, that's my perspective on it. It's a relatively flighty commitment that they could easily reallocate to another fab.
Yeah. And Intel's burned all these companies in the past with not keeping up on their CPU processes. And then there was that Spectre virus that affected their CPUs a few years ago. And a large number of processes got moved from Intel to AMD following that.
Tariffs on China, would they include the iPhones made by Foxconn?
Great question. Historically, Trump's had a good relationship with Tim Cook, and Tim Cook managed to avoid that in the last go around. It's not clear that that's going to be the case this time.
Just for the listeners, I'm going to say some things about Foxconn that Mike and Jason will correct if they're wrong. I think Foxconn has more manufacturing space in China than any other entity. Foxconn, the founder, operates out of Taiwan. It is a Taiwanese company, but I think it's more space under a roof, more factory space under a roof than anyone else in China. I think it also employs more Chinese in China. And it has, they are making iPhones other places, India, places like that, but I believe still 80 or 90% of the iPhones come out of Foxconn plants in China. Have I exaggerated anything there, Mike or Jason?
Nope, that's all my understanding. I think what they're doing in India is, they're trying to diversify their manufacturing base. But, if you're Apple and trying to move to other locations, it's like turning an aircraft carrier, right? Like this is not something that can be done overnight. At least that's my impression of the challenge.
All right. We're down to only a couple of minutes left. Mike and Jason, any other page one news? I mean, obviously Tesla bumped because of the Trump election, but I think that's just, whether there's any substance to that.
Yeah, I think it's worth thinking about technology in general and under this new administration and what that means. Both Trump and Vance have been very anti-big tech. Trump, under the last Trump administration, they initiated the antitrust suit against Google on their payment to Apple, which they won. They started the suit Facebook and WhatsApp. Trump's been very vocal about how he didn't like Zuckerberg and the work that he did in the prior election. Vance, in an interview last week, said he hates big tech. So it's explicit that they're sort of anti-big tech. And how that plays out is really, no one really knows. Vance says he likes Lena Khan. There's a lot, most of the Republican Party, I don't think, in general, sides with that. So it'll be interesting to see how all that stuff plays out. In general, the view is that this administration will make it easier for acquisitions to happen. And I don't know that that's a definite yes. I mean, I think in general, there's a lot of people that are supportive of making it easier for companies to get acquired, but with the animosity towards big tech still being there, it's not clear that that's going to be the case. The other piece of the puzzle, I guess, is regulations. There's not really a ton of regulations in tech, and it seemed like we were moving to a world where there was going to be more regulations. But I think under a Trump presidency, we're going to see, if anything, less. There's a lot of crypto people that are very excited about this election because some notable people within the Biden-Harris administration were anti-crypto. I don't really spend much time thinking about crypto, so it's not really a big deal. But in general, the belief is that it's going to be easier to get acquisitions done. I don't know that I'm convinced that that's going to be the case.
Right. Well, we're running 5 minutes over, so but after all the excitement with the election, I guess we're allowed an extra 5 minutes. I'll be here 7 days from now, and in the meantime, everyone be well and stay healthy. Take care.
The views expressed on this podcast are the host alone and do not constitute an offer to sell or a recommendation to purchase or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security nor a recommendation for any investment product or service. While certain information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, neither the host nor any of their employers or their affiliates have independently verified this information, and its accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Accordingly, no representation or warranty, expressed or implied, is made as to, and no reliance should be placed on, the fairness, accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of this information. The host and all employers and their affiliated persons assume no liability for this information and no obligation to update the information or analysis contained herein in the future, and may or may not hold positions in the securities mentioned.